The letter he never sent. Part 1. The drawer. The letter was in the second drawer, not the top drawer, which held the ordinary administrative contents of a dojo office, registration forms, competition schedules, the utility bill that had been there long enough to become furniture. The second drawer, the one that required more intention to open, held things that had been placed there with the understanding that they would not need to be retrieved often. A spare set of keys, 2 championship certificates he had never framed, a photograph of his mother taken at Christmas 1966, in which she was laughing at something outside the frame. And at the back, under all of these, folded into quarters along creases that had been made and remade so many times the paper had softened at the folds, the letter. Chuck Norris was 32 years old, and the letter was 3 years old, and he had not opened it since the night he wrote it. He had written it the evening before Wieland shipped out, September 1969. Wieland had come to the dojo for the afternoon. They had trained together for 2 hours, which they did whenever Wieland was in California, the training being the language between them that carried what the other language couldn't. And then they had eaten dinner at the diner on Hawthorne Boulevard where they always ate, the one with the fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were being interrogated, and they had talked about the things brothers talk about when one of them is shipping to Vietnam and both of them know it, and neither of them is saying it directly. Chuck had come back to the dojo after dinner and had sat at this desk and written the letter. He had written it because there were things he had not said at dinner, things that felt too large for the diner's fluorescent light, too permanent for the context of a Tuesday evening that was trying to be ordinary. He had written them down instead, with the intention of giving the letter to Wieland the following morning at the bus station. He had not given it. At the bus station, with the morning around them and Wieland in his uniform and the bus exhaust in the air and the specific quality of a departure that both of them understood might be permanent, but that neither was going to acknowledge as such. At the bus station, the letter had been in Chuck's jacket pocket and had stayed there. Because the moment had its own shape and the letter would have changed its shape, and Wieland was carrying enough already, and the things in the letter were things that could be said later face to face when Wieland came home. When Wieland came home, the letter had been in the drawer since that September morning. Chuck had opened the drawer perhaps a dozen times in 3 years. He had never opened the letter. He had looked at it, at the folded paper with the creases worn soft, and had understood each time that he was not ready, and had closed the drawer. He opened it this morning because he had woken at 4 with the specific quality of wakefulness that is not rest interrupted, but rest completed, and had lain in the dark, understanding that today was the day he was going to open it. He unfolded the letter. Part 2. What the letter said. He had written it in his own handwriting, which was serviceable rather than elegant. The handwriting of a man who used it for practical purposes and had not spent time on its aesthetics. The paper was yellow-lined, the kind from a legal pad. The date at the top, September 11th, 1969. The opening line was the one that had been the hardest to write, which was why it was the simplest. Wieland. I should have said more of this to your face. I'm not good at that. You know that, but I'm going to try to say it here. He read the letter through once, straight, without stopping. Then he folded it again along its worn creases and put it on the desk and sat with it. What the letter contained was not complicated. It was not eloquent. It was the attempt of a 30-year-old man to say the things about his brother that he had been carrying for a decade and had never found the right occasion or the right form to express. It said that Wieland was the most certain person Chuck had ever known, certain of who he was, of what he valued, of where the lines were that he would not cross. It said that Chuck had been trying to build that quality in himself through the training and the discipline and the years of competition, and that when he looked at the progress he had made, he measured it against Wieland's natural version of the same quality and always found the gap instructive. It said that he was afraid. Not for himself. He understood that Wieland would find that particular assertion from Chuck unconvincing, which was why he said it plainly. He was afraid for Wieland, which was a different and much older fear, going back to the same childhood they had both survived by different means. The letter said, "You told me when you were 12 that you wouldn't live to see 28. I didn't take that seriously the way predictions are taken seriously. I took it seriously the way I always took the things you said, as expressions of something true in you that I didn't always understand. I want you to be wrong about this. I need you to be wrong about this. I need you to come home." And then, at the end, in the handwriting of someone who had been sitting with these words for an hour and had finally stopped negotiating with himself about saying them, "Whatever happens, I want you to know that watching you grow up was the best thing I had access to in a childhood that didn't give us much. You were the steadiest thing in it. I tried to be that for you, for Aaron, for Mom. I'm not sure I managed it the way you did, but I tried because you showed me that it was something a person could be. You showed me what it looked like." That was the end of the letter. Chuck sat with it on his desk in the early grey light and understood, for the first time since Wieland's death, something about the specific nature of the thing he had been carrying. Part 3. The shape of unsent things. He had not been to the dojo's early session that morning. He had come in at 6, 2 hours later than usual, and sat at his desk and opened the letter and read it and put it back on the desk and sat with it until the morning got enough light through the east window to read by without turning on the lamp. He thought about the bus station, about the September morning and the uniform and Wieland's particular way of standing, not at attention, not consciously military, just with the quality of a person who was always simply exactly where they intended to be. He had been 25 at that departure. Chuck had been 30, the older brother, the champion, the man who had built something from the ruins of the childhood they had shared. And at the bus station he had had in his pocket the letter that said everything he needed to say, and he had not given it. He had not given it because he had believed there would be more time. This was the specific wound underneath the grief, the one he had not been able to reach in 3 years of carrying the weight. Not the loss itself. The loss was enormous and permanent, and had the specific quality of something that reshaped the landscape it occupied. But underneath the loss, the particular failure of the unsent letter, the things he had been capable of saying and had chosen not to say in the available moment because he had assumed the moment would return. Moments do not return. He had spent his entire adult life building a practice around this knowledge, the training, the discipline, the early mornings at 5, the refusal to defer the work to a more convenient tomorrow. He had understood, in the domain of the physical and the competitive, that the moment in front of you was the only moment available to you, and that deferring action in it was the primary mechanism by which people missed their lives. He had known this about training. He had known it about competition. He had not, somehow, applied it to his brother at a bus station on a September morning. The letter had been in his pocket. He had kept it. Paulie arrived at 7:30 and knocked on the open office door and looked at Chuck at the desk with the expression of someone reading a room carefully before proceeding. "You okay?" he said. "I will be," Chuck said. Paulie nodded once and went to set up the equipment room, which told Chuck that Paulie understood something about the quality of the morning and had decided that the most useful thing he could do was be present without requiring engagement. This was one of the things Chuck valued about Paulie, which he had never said to Paulie's face. He noted this now and filed it in the category of things to say before the moment for saying them closed. Part 4. The Student Who Had a Brother. The 9 o'clock class had 18 people in it. Chuck taught it with the full attention he brought to every class, which was not diminished by what the morning had held. The training was the training. The practice was the practice. 18 people had come to this room and given their time and their effort to it, and they deserved his full capacity, and he gave it. After the class, while students were gathering their things and moving toward the door in the ordinary post-session dispersal, one of them stopped at the edge of the floor. His name was Kevin Park, 24 years old, an intermediate student, 6 months into his training, with the quality of someone who was genuinely engaged with what he was learning rather than performing engagement for the benefit of an audience. He stood at the edge of the floor with the slightly uncertain posture of someone who has something to say and is deciding whether to say it. "Mr. Norris," he said, "I wanted to ask you something, not about training, about something personal, if that's all right." "Go ahead," Chuck said. "My brother is enlisting next month," Kevin said. "Army. He's 20 years old, and I don't know what to say to him. I know what I want to say, but every time we're in the same room, I end up saying the ordinary things, the safe things." He looked at the floor. "I've been thinking about it all week. Is there a right way to do this? To say the things that actually matter to someone who might be going somewhere they might not come back from?" Chuck was very still. He looked at Kevin Park, 24 years old, good student, honest question, and understood that the morning had been building to this, not as a mystical construction, not as the universe arranging its pieces, but as the kind of convergence that happens when you are carrying something and then something in the world reflects it back to you, and the reflection gives you the distance to see what you're carrying more clearly. "Tell me about your brother," Chuck said. Part 5. What Chuck told him. They sat in the 2 chairs along the back wall, the student chairs where observers sat during classes. The dojo was empty around them, the last of the 9 o'clock students having gone. The morning light was at the angle that came between 10 and 11, clean and direct through the east window. Kevin Park described his brother, whose name was James, 2 years younger, quiet in the way of someone who experienced things deeply before he expressed them, with a particular kind of humor that was always unexpected, that arrived at angles you didn't see coming. He played guitar. He had wanted to study history in college, but the money had run out. He had enlisted partly because the army would fund his education afterward, and partly, Kevin thought, because he was 20 years old and he was looking for the experience of being tested in a way that his current life was not providing. Chuck listened. He had been listening to people describe the people they loved for 30 years and had learned from that listening that the most important part of it was not the facts conveyed, but the quality of care with which the description was made, the specific details that a person chooses when they are trying to make someone else real to you, the details that are always the ones that matter most to the speaker, even if they cannot explain why. Kevin finished. He looked at Chuck. "So how do you say the things that matter?" Chuck picked up the letter from the desk. He had brought it out with him without quite deciding to. The way you bring something with you when you understand that it needs to be part of what you're doing, even if you don't know yet how. He held it in his hands. "I wrote a letter to my brother before he shipped out," he said. "I wrote it the night before he left. I had it with me at the bus station." He paused. "I didn't give it to him. I told myself there would be more time. There wasn't." Kevin was very still. "He was killed in Vietnam in 1970, Chuck said. He was 26 years old." He looked at the letter. "I've had this in a drawer for 3 years. I read it this morning for the first time since I wrote it, and what I understand now, that I didn't understand when I was standing at that bus station, is that the time you have in front of someone is never guaranteed to extend. The only moment you can speak in is the one you're already in." He looked at Kevin. "The reason we don't say the things that matter is not that we don't have the words. The words are usually there. The reason is that saying them makes them permanent. Saying them acknowledges that the situation is what it is, that your brother is going somewhere dangerous, that the outcome is not certain, that you love him and you're afraid. It's easier to say the ordinary things because the ordinary things don't commit you to having felt the extraordinary ones. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. How do you start? You don't start with the big things, Chuck said. You start with a true thing that is small enough to say without choking on it. One true thing leads to the next. You don't have to say everything. You just have to say enough that he knows, that when he's far away and it's hard, he has heard your voice saying the real thing, not the performance of the real thing. He paused. Write it down first if you need to. There is no shame in writing it down. Some things need the distance of the page to come clear. He looked at the letter in his hands. If you write it, give it to him. Don't keep it. Don't wait. The bus station is the last moment that feels ordinary. Don't let the ordinary moment swallow the thing that needs to be said in it. Kevin looked at the letter. Do you wish you had sent it? Chuck thought about this with the honesty it deserved. Yes, he said. And also, the not sending it is part of who I've been since. It taught me something that I needed to learn, though the price of learning it was too high. He paused. Wieland would have told me that. He would have said, you learnt it, that's what you do with it, not carry it as a wound. Carry it as instruction. Part 6, the second letter. He wrote it that evening. Not to Kevin Park, who had left that morning with the look of someone who had gotten what they came for and knew what to do with it. Not to Wieland, who was 3 years gone and beyond the reach of paper and pen. He wrote it to himself, or not to himself exactly, but to the version of himself that had stood at a bus station with a letter in his pocket and chosen silence, and who needed to be addressed directly, with honesty and without cruelty. It was not a long letter. It was shorter than the first one. He wrote that the first letter had been the right thing to write and the wrong thing to keep. He wrote that the keeping of it had been an act of self-protection disguised as consideration, that he had told himself he was protecting Wieland from an emotional weight at a moment when Wieland was already carrying an enormous one, but that the truth was simpler and less flattering. He had protected himself from the acknowledgement that the departure was real, and the risk was real, and the love was real, and all of those realities together were too much to hold in the ordinary light of a bus station morning. He wrote, the things we don't say in the available moment don't wait for us. They become the weight of what we should have said, which is a different and heavier thing than the weight of the saying itself. The saying is a moment. The unsaid is a lifetime. He wrote, Wieland knew I loved him. I am certain of this. The letter would not have told him something he did not already know. What it would have done is give him the specific texture of my particular love for him, the details and the history and the precise quality of what I saw in him that I never had a word for but was trying, in that letter, to find one. That is what the unsent letter took away from him. Not the knowledge of being loved, the experience of hearing how. He wrote, I will not make this mistake again. Not because I can undo this one, because the people in my life right now, my mother, my students, the people who have come to this room and trusted me with something real, deserve to hear the specific texture of what I think of them. Not generally, specifically. While there is time, he put the pen down. He read what he had written. Then he took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote the opening lines of a letter to his mother. Epilogog, the letters he sent. Over the following months, Chuck wrote 7 letters to his mother. 6 pages, which said things he had never said to her face about what it had meant to watch her hold the family together through the years of his father's absence and Wieland's death, about the specific quality of her patience and what it had shown him about what a person could endure without becoming something diminished. He mailed it on a Tuesday and called her on a Thursday after she had had time to read it. She cried. He did not expect to hear himself almost cry on the phone, but he did, briefly, and was not ashamed of it. To Aaron, his younger brother, 3 pages. To Paulie, who had been running the equipment room with quiet competence for 7 years, and who had knocked on an office door on a hard morning and read the room and said the right 2 words and left. 1 page, which was the right length for 1 page's worth of true things. To the 3 students who had trained with him since the beginning, who had been there for the losses as well as the wins and had kept coming. And to Wieland, 1 page. He knew Wieland would not receive it. He wrote it anyway, because the first letter had been written to say what he needed Wieland to know, and this one was written to say what he needed Wieland to understand, not about himself, but about what Wieland's life had continued to do after it ended, how it had shaped Chuck's, how it continued to shape it, how the specific quality of Wieland's certainty, the quality Chuck had always envied and had spent his adult life trying to build, had turned out to be something he had already partially received, simply by having been in the same room with it during the years they shared. He did not mail this letter. He drove to the cemetery on a Tuesday morning when it was quiet and left it at the headstone, held down by a stone he found at the edge of the grass. He stood there for a few minutes in the morning light and felt the particular quality of grief that has been fully inhabited and has, in the inhabiting of it, become something different, not gone, not reduced, but integrated, part of the structure rather than an intrusion into it. Then he drove back to the dojo. He had a 9 o'clock class. The students were arriving. The floor was waiting. He had learned something from the letter he had kept for 3 years that he could not have learned any other way. He had learned it at a cost he would not have chosen and could not reduce. But he had learned it. He was going to keep teaching it. Every morning, 1 letter at a time, 1 true thing at a time, before the moment closed.